We're going to go ahead and get started, and I'll just continue to admit people as they join. Thank you so much for coming today. I see some new faces, which we love. We're really looking forward to getting updated today and then hearing from our special guest, Frank Southall. He's going to be joining in just a minute. A reminder to mute yourself when you aren't speaking. Please introduce yourself, drop your name, and if applicable, your organization or your co-affiliation in the chat. We're going to have time for Q&A and open conversation at the end, and that's an opportunity to take yourself off mute or drop those questions in the chat. I can read off of that if it's more convenient for you. Want to make sure that everybody's questions are answered. And then a reminder that this is being recorded. Thank you to AOC Community Media for always making sure that our meetings are accessible to everyone. If you'd like to access this meeting later, I am going to drop that link right now in the chat. And then of course it'll go out in the newsletter. It'll come out later in November. Admit all. So to begin, we're going to ask 232 Help, our local 211, to ground us with some latest data. Pierre and Tabitha, I see both of you on. So take yourself off mute and take it away.
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, everybody. I just wanted to go over some numbers. It looks a little different this month than it usually does. We kind of expanded the data a little bit just so you can all see. Just to clarify, the met needs basically just means those are the needs that we were able to provide information on, not necessarily that those people, the callers, received that service. That's just the information we were able to give them. Same with unmet needs. It doesn't necessarily mean that they were not able to get help. It's just that those are the needs that we had no resources for. So as you can see, the numbers are pretty staggering as far as for the unmet needs emergency shelter. We had 81 calls for that, and this was within 1 month. There were 88 calls for housing expense assistance, and then for a total of 177. Now, as far as for the met needs, again, just because we were able to give that information does not mean that their need was met, but those numbers are even more staggering. We had 153 calls for emergency shelter, 133 for housing expense assistance, residential housing options, which I think falls under Section 8, 253. And then the most staggering number was the utility assistance at 508 calls just for that. So the numbers are pretty high right now.
Tabitha, I had a quick question. In the email that you all sent with these numbers, it said that between that September 17th to October 17th timeframe, that you received a total of 1,508 calls.
Yes.
But then if you add these two numbers together, it's 1,307. Does that mean that of all the calls that are going into 232 Help, the great majority of them are related to housing and homelessness?
Yes, a majority of them are. The remaining, two or 300 something others than the 1,500. Those are things like food pantries, clothing vouchers, just different things like that. But yes, the majority are housing related.
Thank you. I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but I just noticed it this morning.
No, that's correct.
Are you ready for me to go to the next slide?
Yes. Okay. So this shows from our quarterly update. We answered a total of 5,624 calls. Out of them, these are the unmet needs. Again, rent payment assistance, utility service payment assistance, motel bill payment assistance. We've been having a lot of callers asking for those motel vouchers. There's 41 that needed rental deposit assistance. And just to be transparent, a lot of them, I will say a portion of them, they were callers that got into Section 8 housing, but they needed the funding to put down the deposit for, they got Section 8, they found a house, but they just didn't have the funds to put down the deposit. Homeless motel voucher assistance and motel bill payment assistance, those are pretty much the same. It's just worded different in our database. But for the most part, a good percentage of our calls is homelessness related.
Well, I really, I thank you for this. I think it's so helpful to have that data at the beginning of all of these conversations. You are our first line of defense. You're our canary in the mine, and we really appreciate your partnership. So thank you so much to all of you over there who relentlessly and with so much patience answer these calls. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Are there any questions for Tabitha? You can go ahead and take yourself off mute.
I do have a quick question. This is Melinda with Habitat for Humanity. Tabitha, you mentioned a lot of calls for utility assistance. Are you hearing any reports from people that those calls are due to a large unpaid balance that suddenly appears on the bill as a result of what LUS characterizes as misbilling or an error on their part that is passed on to the person?
I don't think that we've had anybody. We may have had some that specifically say that it was an error on the part of the utility servicer, but some people are calling with $1,500 bills, but they don't explain to us that it's an error on LUS or the utility servicer's part. Right. They don't really clarify that.
Yeah, I just don't know the volume of this happening, but I do know that we've had reports from at least 3 people of all of a sudden a large amount showing up on their bill that says other, and basically that other is accounted for by LUS as being an error or an equipment issue on their part that results in their discovering that they weren't fully billing the person for whatever it was. I think in most cases it's water or the water or sewer services. And we've had one of our homeowners who has no ability to make this additional payment that they're trying to assess monthly for her. It was like a $1,600 amount that just appeared on her utility bill.
So now water, yes, I do recall 1 or 2 calls. I forget LUS is all inclusive with their utilities. And when you say utilities, I just assume electric. But yes, I do recall 1 or 2 calls for people that had their water bill who say they never got billed. And then all of a sudden they get this big astronomical, $1,200-$1,300 bill. I do recall 1 or 2 of those, Miss Melinda.
Right. So you are seeing that then. I don't know the scope of it, but apparently, it's nothing that is not legal. You would think that there would be some recourse for the individual, but there's not. They can actually do that, but they're trying to get one of our folks to pay $50 a month towards this arrears that was because of their error, and she can't do that. She doesn't have that kind of money. So yeah, so not to belabor a point, but just wondering what the situation was there, if you were seeing more of that.
There was a few, like I said, but not an astronomical amount for sure.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else have any questions for Tabitha? All right, well, thank you again. The whole 232 Help team really appreciate your data and Christopher Wallace has his hand up.
Hey, Tabitha, how you doing?
Good, how are you?
I'm well. The question I have is, I was wondering how is funding going for those resources as far as for utilities? I know that in the Tangipahoa whole parish and the surrounding areas that there have been an issue with funding. When our members were called to have assistance with their utilities, that they really couldn't get the help or utilize the resource because of funding.
It's been really tight. We no matter what, we do give the resource, but we do have a lot of callers that say, oh, I've already tried this resource or I've already tried that resource. And at that point, we just have to inform them, you know, I'm so sorry, but those are the only resources we have available. So yes, to answer your question, utility and rent payment assistance are both very strained right now. But we do give what we have in hopes that, you know, it's also dependent upon their situation too. The resource may state to one caller, you know, oh, unfortunately, we just don't have anything right now, but depending upon the case, they may help out others.
Absolutely. And I want to thank you for all the work that you all are doing.
Oh, absolutely.
And that it has kind of inspired us at Healthy Blue to kind of do something a little different. We've been working on this Morningstar funding to kind of assist with some of those needs. I mean, it's per member, and they have to have certain criteria, of course, but we're trying to have some funding as a value-based benefit, value-added benefit to be able to assist those members that are struggling with utilities and housing if need be, or moving, because some people have to move, and that's an expense too. So I just want to
that's amazing.
Give you and your team the flowers that you guys deserve for the work that y'all been doing. I know it's not easy, and it's hard to tell someone know when they're struggling, especially on this time of year, but it's the reality. The need is far more than a resource.
It is, but you know what? I'll be honest with you. We've had some really good callers. They're understanding. They know that, you know, sometimes the help is there and sometimes it's just not. So for the most part, 99.99% of our callers are very understanding, and they, you know, they're grateful for the information that we can give them.
Absolutely.
Thank you again. Oh, Christopher, what is your geographic footprint?
I cover the whole state of Louisiana, and I cover Tennessee as well.
Wow. Okay.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's a big chunk. All right.
It is a big chunk.
Thank you so much.
You're so welcome.
Again, thank you, 232 Help.
Sure.
Additional updates. I'm going to go ahead and start with Arch. We were able to submit both NOFOs, that's the Notice of Funding Opportunity application, collaborative applications, both the regular one that we do each year, as well as a special one that was offered this year. One was submitted in September, then the other in October. We thank everybody who participated in that process. And then when we know more, you all will too. It may be several months before we hear anything. With regard to House Resolution 194 that we've spoken about in the past, and that we've been following. Thank you to those of you who were able to join the public hearings and used your voice to appeal for additional funding and consideration at the state level. Our COC, our Continuum of Care, will be working with the Louisiana Housing Corporation and the Louisiana Fair Housing Action Center on the report that will be prepared and presented to the legislature in early spring. And that's about the state of homelessness and the lack of deeply affordable housing across the state. And working on collecting data across the state right now in order to incorporate that into the report. The Share House needs donations. We've had a little bit of a slowdown in donations. So please, as you do fall cleaning, as you move through the holidays and receive gifts and you now are replacing things, remember that your gently used household items can really go to good use by donating to the Share House. And that we receive donations on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays from 10 to 3. And then lastly, before I turn it over to anyone else, any other agencies or individuals, this is our last regular meeting of the year. Our annual meeting will be on December 1st because the fourth Thursday of the month in November is Thanksgiving Day. So we'll be moving it to, let's just say, the 5th Thursday of the month, which is actually the first day of December. And it'll be conducted virtually, but it'll just be an overview. We'll have a special speaker and then an overview of our year to date, what 2022 looked like. I'd like to now open the floor to any agencies or individuals that have updates or announcements. Please just take yourself off of mute and jump in. I have a lot of screens open right now, so it's difficult for me to navigate anything more than that. So if you have an update or announcement, now's the time. Anyone at all? I know it's a busy time of year. Joshua, were you meaning to take yourself off mute? There you
yes,
go.
Sorry.
Hi.
Yeah, sorry. I thought I had heard someone else talking, so I wanted to give them. But I did want to say, hi there, Joshua Tuskler, part of Housing Louisiana. I'm actually trying very hard to, Housing Louisiana is trying very hard to get more involved in the Southwest Louisiana region. That includes Lake Charles and that includes Lafayette. We're heavily involved right now in the Public Service Commissioner race, running candidate forums, including one that's happening tonight. If anyone would like to, please reach out and I will send you the Zoom link for that. It's just a Zoom candidate forum before the elections go on. And then after that, we are beginning our processing steps for next year. And like I said, we want to try and expand out to Southwest Louisiana. I'm heavily involved with that, and Miss Eloina Woods out in Lake Charles is heavily involved in that. So, please feel free to reach out and, let's try and get some more coalition building going. Let's try and get a proper chapter set up, get some offices and, try and expand. Thank you.
Thank you.
And yes, I'll try and track down that Zoom link and I'll post it in the chat for anyone. So 1 second.
Sounds good. And Melinda, you and I might want to speak offline with Joshua about the efforts of coalition building. Thanks. Anyone else have any updates?
Hi, this is Kimberly. I was with ARC, but I'm now just a regular old citizen. And I am considering trying to organize some speakers at our next city council meeting about some of the issues I guess we're having in the neighborhood of, I live on Madison Street, but I run the Fightingville Fresh Market on Simcoe, and Lafayette Community Fridge operates a free fridge and pantry there. And, we see a lot of foot traffic, and there's been a lot of problems with that foot traffic not having anywhere to use the bathroom. And I know a lot of our neighbors are having some issues with that. Melinda, I know I've heard from Habitat people that the houses y'all are building have had that issue. And then I just also, I guess, want to mention we have some neighbors who are kind of resistant to the pantry, which we have seen to be a very valued resource. And so at some point we might have to mobilize some support for that resource to remain operational. But yeah, I just wanted to say that at the next city council meeting, we might be speaking towards some of those issues in the neighborhood and kind of trying to help the city understand that it's important. Yeah.
Kim, how do we support you, or how do we get involved in utilizing our voices as well?
I'm not sure yet, to be honest.
Okay. Okay.
But Elsa, I guess I'll just communicate with you as things kind of progress. It'd be great to have a handful of people speaking at the city council about the issue. We're going to reach out to people who utilize the fridge and pantry, and some of the neighbors who are supportive, and see if we can just, just kind of go on record stating that.
Sounds
I'll
good.
put my contact information in the chat, and if anyone wants to reach out, they can.
Perfect. And we'll chat offline. But thank you so much for all that work you're doing. There's a message in the chat, but in case you...
How does the judging work for this? So we have a couple judges from all around the area who are assigned to a category, and they'll...
Hi, Elsa. This is Ozina Durrell.
Hi.
I have an update.
Please.
Quiet Town Community Coterie will be hosting their 8th annual block party this Saturday, October 29th, from 11 to 1 p.m. Also, we will have Second Harvest food distribution as well. That'll be drive-through. And the information for location is 301 Darrell Street. And we have several sponsors as Raising Cane's, Doug Ashley. So there will be door prizes. We will also have the diaper bank. Again, that's Quiet Town Community Coterie 8th Annual Block Party, along with Second Harvest Food Bank distribution. Thank you.
Thanks, Alcina.
You're welcome.
In the chat, you may see, but if in case you don't have access to the chat, the Department of Public Safety and Corrections is seeking housing providers to join the Emergency and Transitional Housing Program to provide stable short-term housing and food access on a per diem basis to participants. The application is now open. I'm summarizing, and I will send this out in a newsletter. And the deadline for applications is November 9th. At 4:30 p.m. And in the chat, there is also a description of what that program is, the email for any questions regarding the application, as well as a downloadable application. But again, I will send that out as a newsletter. And in fact, I will try to send one out by the end of the week. Let me make myself a note. So that there's plenty of time to move through that application process before the 9th. All right, any other announcements before we move on?
Hi, Elsa. A quick question for everyone. On the proposed constitutional amendments that's up for election right now, we're talking about utilities and water, like number 4. It says, do you support an amendment to allow local government to waive water charges as a result of damage to the water system not caused by the customer? Is that something all of us as a group can support? Would that affect some of our clients who are having high water bills?
I don't feel like I know enough about that yet, but that's definitely something perhaps we can talk about in our homeless service provider meeting as a COC, and then make a recommendation as far as our thoughts on that. Does anyone else want to weigh in? All right, so Carrie, we'll talk about that later.
Very good, thanks.
Thank you for putting it on our radar.
I will say, for everything I've heard about it, it sounds very pro. Obviously that's a much longer, later discussion before anyone would move as like a group. But from what I've heard about it, unlike a lot of stuff, it seems pretty cut and dry. I haven't heard any backdoor ways for it to, screw over people. But, again, there's a lot of stuff that's on the ballot that you need to take a fine tooth comb with because, you get to the last sentence of it and then it's like actually, because one word's in it, it means the exact opposite of everything that was before it. So, like I said, I've heard good things about it, but definitely worth individually looking at before anyone just signs off on it.
Thank you.
Thanks for the comments.
All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and move on. So without further ado, I would like to welcome our guest today, Frank Southall. Organizing and Community Engagement Manager for Jane Place Neighborhood Sustainability Initiative in New Orleans. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and turn our slides off so we can see your face. And I appreciate your joining us.
Yeah, thank you all for having me. Can you all hear me all right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome.
So if you don't mind, can you start by talking about the history and the mission of Jane Place?
Yeah, so Jane Place Neighborhood Sustainability Initiative, JPNSI for short, or just Jane Place. We're a community land trust and housing justice organization based in New Orleans. And we work in the greater New Orleans metro area. If you're not familiar with the concept of land trust, just imagine like a savings account, except for with land. The community aspect of the land trust model means that all of our operations are basically decided by the community. So we have slots on our board reserved for community members. We do organizing work, policy work, advocacy, research, education work around renters' rights, all focusing on the community, what the community needs. So every piece of information someone gives us, we use it to formulate our campaigns and the work we do. So everything from our hotline, that's how we came with the idea of doing right to counsel, to relaunching our Healthy Homes campaign, which is a habitability standards campaign that some of y'all may have heard is being debated right now in City Council in New Orleans. You may have seen it in the news. But yeah, our mission is basically build permanently affordable housing, meaning we believe that housing is human right, and the housing we build will never be outside the price range of working class folks.
So if you don't mind, can you tell us a little bit about what your personal journey was to the work, and what do you do specifically within Jane Place?
Yeah, so I've worked professionally in the housing world for past 11 years. Mainly my first real bona fide job was working for a NeighborWorks America organization in New Orleans called NeighborWorks or Neighborhood Housing Services of New Orleans. And so I did that work. It wasn't as fulfilling because I wanted to do more organizing work, and I also wanted to combine the research element to the organizing work because I believe strongly that if you can't find the answers, you have to go get the answers yourself, meaning that you have to figure out the answers to questions you have. And so that's what I was doing from 2012 to 2016. And then I took a break from working in the nonprofit sector and did some marketing and street team outreach work for a friend's company, basically promoting music and movies and all sorts of shows that were coming in the city, such as Broadway, New Orleans, and all that stuff. And then I knew Jane Place in part because I lived in a house with a bunch of the co-founders of Jane Place. And just talk briefly about that history. Jane Place was founded in 2008, 3 years after storm, in response to what we were seeing, what we call sort of disaster capitalism, where a lot of money was coming to city, but wasn't benefiting the residents. Many residents were not able to repair their homes with the money that the federal and state government were offering them. And that was leading to displacement. And that was having a double effect on renters, right? Because if your landlord can't afford to repair their building, then you're not going to be able to come back. So Jane Place was started up in Mid-City neighborhood. If you're familiar with New Orleans, basically it's about a mile from the French Quarter, because we saw a lot of developers swooping in, buying up property, buying up land, raising rent, raising property values. And so that's the context in which we're birthed. And then we didn't develop our first piece of property until 2016. And then in 2016 is actually when we had our first full-time staff member. And I came on board 2 years later as the lead organizer and engagement coordinator. And since then, we went from having 2 people 2.5 years ago to having 7 full-time staff, having 2 part-time staff, and we're actually continuing to grow. So we've grown a lot in the past 3-4 years.
So, if we're talking about a community land trust, what do you see as the assets of that model, and are there potential drawbacks?
I think the community land trust model, if accepted by our policymakers, is a way to ensure that there's not intense speculation in neighborhoods. I know that the rest of Louisiana isn't dealing with the high costs of renting and property taxes we're dealing with, but I do think that New Orleans is sort of like the canary in the coal mine. And I think it's something which we need to focus on nationwide, where if we invest dollars coming from federal government and state government in property where, the tax subsidies don't age out, then we're not going to be dealing with the same problems that we're dealing with now. So we believe that all public money should be invested in property that's going to remain affordable. To us, it's a pretty simple solution. Other countries operate public housing. I've been in Germany, I've been to France, I've been to Spain, I've been to UK, I've been in Canada and Quebec. They have great public housing. And the truth of the matter is, it's a matter of the funding stream, how they fund it, and how long they fund it. And so we could do the same thing in the US with our economy. It's just a matter of political will. So I would say the one drawback is that I think outside of my, if I had a dream, all money would go towards community land trusts, and we would reinvigorate public housing in our state and in our country. But I think the drawback is it's harder for people to understand. It's a very different model. Like, once we grow in scale, once we go from more than the 10 buildings that we have, the 2 apartment buildings, 8 houses we have, I think it's going to be harder for people to truly understand this model, because people are so siloed in our society that it takes a while to go like, hey, you have to cooperate together. We have to work together to ensure our survival, to ensure that this work happens. So I think that's more the thing that we've discovered, is that when we've gone out and explained the model and track the tenants that way, they do a lot more successful. Whereas if they are just looking at us as like a standard landlord, where it's just like, oh yeah, like, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, you call us to do this thing, this small thing. When you live in land trust property, you can live there for life. Like, if people want to live and raise their children and then their grandchildren in our apartment buildings, so as long as they income qualify, they can do that. As a matter of fact, actually, now that I think about it, we don't kick people out when their income's raised. We just scale it up. Some of our properties are developed with federal dollars, so we can't have people, for example, in one of our buildings, we only rent at 30% AMI, because that's what the funding's for. So we can't have someone who comes in there at 30% AMI and then, like, 5 months later, they're making $100,000. We can't have that. But we don't want to penalize our tenants for improving their life, but we do want to keep them. And so that's like another piece of our model, is that, like, people can stay there as long as they want. It's practically theirs, so as long as they're involved in the work and they maintain the property. So it's a very different kind of thinking, I would say.
Yeah, it's very exciting. I know that a lot of, I've read that a lot of the work that you all do is about shoring up the rights of tenants. While in Acadiana, we really rely on the landlords with whom we enjoy really strong partnerships. Do you find that in Louisiana, particularly, are we property owner friendly? And what can we be doing to shore up the rights of tenants?
So it's really hard to get rankings in terms of landlord-tenant laws and renters' rights, but we generally say that we rank 45th to 49th because of very series of metrics, such as notice to vacate, eviction law, habitability standards, all those things that factor into people having quality, safe housing. The only state we rank below us is Arkansas. And some of y'all may know Arkansas, you can literally be arrested for not paying your rent. So objectively, I mean, Arkansas definitely, to me, is worse off than Louisiana could be in that regard. I think the thing that's also unique about our state is that, New Orleans is, for better or worse, it's definitely a much more progressive political and social area in terms of how our legislators think about these issues, in terms of how people think about these issues. I think sometimes it creates friction in Baton Rouge because people go like, oh, well, these are New Orleans problems. The reality is they're the whole state problems. The difference is that due to how intense the cost of living is here, the average one bedroom in good condition in a pretty standard working class, lower middle class neighborhood is going to set you back at like $1,100 at this point in our city. Even the suburbs are getting more expensive. Like you go out to Jefferson Parish, like Metairie and Kenner, or St. Bernard Parish, like Chalmette, Araby, even the North Shore. So the whole metro area is becoming more and more expensive. And so I think that is one of the issues, is there's this weird tension that I think that exists. But really, I think these issues are going to come home to roost all over our state. Well, maybe not northern Louisiana, but definitely like southern Louisiana, when I talk to folks in Baton Rouge and, in the river parishes. It's just the southern part of the state due to the combination of climate change, hurricanes we have. When Hurricane Laura hit Lake Charles, where did people go? They went to Lafayette, but they also came to New Orleans. And one of the complexes we were organizing at had a lot of Hurricane Laura evacuees. So these people were living in utter chaos. This landlord, Joshua Bruno, was horrific. And we won that campaign against him. He's losing control of his property, thankfully. But it was just a sad realization that these people had left Lake Charles only to come to New Orleans and experience a worse fate, due to the quality of housing. And the thing is, slumlords are attracted to New Orleans because they know our state laws. They know how easy it is to buy property. They know that tenant laws aren't as strong as they are, say, in New York, in California, in Illinois. So we always say that our slumlords are both local. There are a lot of them who are born and raised in Louisiana. Some of them wealthy, some of them just like with a couple properties. But there's a lot of people who are attracted from around the world to buy property in the metro area of New Orleans. And that was really apparent in when as a matter of fact, it was a Hurricane Laura evacuee who sent us a message on Facebook about the complex. So that's a big thing I think of a lot, is that there's not really a comprehensive understanding of what to do next in that regard, in terms of protecting people.
Do you think it's necessary, as a follow-up, that those of us in other non-New Orleans metro area leverage our voices, work in coordination with New Orleans, so that it doesn't look like, oh, it's New Orleans again complaining about this thing that's very specific to New Orleans, when in fact it's a pervasive issue across Louisiana?
Yeah, I think that's really important to really think about that. And I think it's great that there are organizations that are looking at from state level, but I think, I think our particular flavor in our state lends itself to coalitions, because, I may have an opinion here, you may have an opinion there, but if we can come up with some common ground agreements about what should be done, I think that works better. So I feel like ultimately and also the other thing I think I'm very cautious about, I had this dream of producing a Jane Place in every part of the state. But one of the things I realized from several other nonprofits that have done that from out of New Orleans is that there is a level of distrust, even when the folks on the ground in their towns are local, because people are like, well, where is this ideal coming from? Is it coming from funders, or is it coming from y'all legitimately? That y'all talk with people on the ground about these issues. So I really want to see, more so than more Jane Places around the state, I want to help out people who are interested in land trust in like Morgan City or like in Shreveport or, yada, yada, everywhere. Rather than trying to get funders to help us replicate our work everywhere. We definitely want to convene people, and that's one of my dreams is to a Renters' Rights State Conference, a gathering. But I definitely want to see people in their own cities do what they feel like their cities need. And then we can come together on some basic principles and ideals.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense, but
No,
what I mean?
It absolutely makes sense that it should be customized and homegrown with some interconnection. So, and I know we're running out of time, and I feel like you're such a font of information. I saw that you all were mentioned on the White House Summit on Building Lasting Eviction Prevention Reform fact sheet. It's catchy. And it was referring to the first city court eviction diversion program. Can you talk a little bit about that program and the efficacy that you all have seen of that program?
Yeah, so in September 2020, after a law student got evicted from her apartment building, suffered a mental health breakdown, and burned and displaced several residents due to the fact that she didn't have access to a lawyer, we said we gotta get right to counsel. And for those of y'all who are unfamiliar with the concept, right to counsel is a term in the housing world that refers to the idea that any tenant facing eviction or other housing issues should have access to a lawyer. Similar, like, if someone gets arrested for a crime, they have access to right to counsel in terms of having a public attorney or a public defender. And so we took it a little bit step further and said, we just don't want to give people access to an attorney, but also knowledge of the law. And we also want to figure out ways we can create diversion programs. So we worked, we organized the campaign. Somehow City Hall was like, we asked for $500,000, they gave $2 million for this project, which is unheard of any time in New Orleans.
Yeah.
But I think that they saw that it was a really good program. And I think that they wanted to match what our peers are doing in Baltimore and Cleveland. I think also like a lot of the city council members at that time had done housing work. So Councilmember Palmer, Councilmember Banks at the time, Councilmember Wynn, those three in particular knew a lot about the housing world. And so they knew the role of evictions. The other thing too is we conduct a lot of research around evictions. So we were able to show for our eviction court monitoring project where we literally sit in eviction and calculate, or not calculate, but gather the outcomes, and we gather demographic data to the best of our knowledge. We were able to show that 65% tenants that face eviction were evicted. However, 14% of tenants who had access to a lawyer, on which we know 99% of the time those lawyers were pro bono attorneys via legal aid, but only 14% of tenants, when they had access to a lawyer, were evicted. And so we used that data piece, and y'all can look at the report on our website. I can post the link in a few minutes. But we used that piece and we got a coalition together and got passed. And so now First City Court is working with us a lot more regarding these issues. So they're a lot more friendlier. And I think they also want to be on the good side of the community because they're looking at these statistics and going like, this is jarring, even though they're the judges. And so they're like, and they know that like if a tenant has a lawyer, the lawyer is able to deconstruct what's going on a lot more often. And so we've seen definitely a steep decline in illegal evictions, a lot more negotiating. So landlords are working with lawyers, they actually get more of the rent, right? Because if you just evict someone for 2-3 months of rent, you're not going to recoup that. It may take you like a couple of weeks to like get it listed, get someone in there. Whereas if you're able to work with a tenant, especially if there's some animosity, the lawyer is actually able to talk with that tenant and go like, hey, can you pay this much? Or can you work with this? They're also able to connect people to rental assistance and other forms of assistance. And then it just leads to less people having evictions on their records, which means that then, say a mom and 2 kids, they're not going to have to rent from that slumlord. They're able to rent from a lot more greater pool of folks. So it's just like better off for our ecosystem, and it's preventing homelessness in numerous ways.
And before we open it up to questions from everyone, an article that I read started out by describing that you were setting up a folding table with flyers at the corner by the First City Court building. And so as an outreach person who specializes in outreach and community building, do you have tips or ideas for us about effective outreach?
Yes. I mean, one thing I'll say is we get the cold drinks out, or soda. I don't know what people call them, Southwest Louisiana, but we get Cokes and Sprites out, chips. And what we have decided to do is go to what we call our bus hub after Hard Rock Hotel fell down. It kind of destroyed where the people catch buses at. So we just go out where most of the buses are at and hand out information. And our kind of approach is sort of like we want to disseminate information community. Even if people can't remember all the facts, they know there's a place they can call. And generally, like a lot of our calls that come through our hotline, they'll be like, oh yeah, my cousin was catching a bus and they saw a flyer and they been like, all right, I'm gonna text you. And then that's how the person gets help and it stops eviction. So I would say that. The other thing we've noticed is social events. Granted, in New Orleans, we have a lot more service industry workers, and so things are open later. But just like being able to go to a concert here and there and just flyering, even if you're like around a bunch of people who are homeowners, they have kids, they have cousins. It's just like the more information you get out there in unique ways, the more you're going to help someone out. Churches too. So, especially like, around Easter, just being out flying, asking if you can during carnival season, go to some of the clubs and, just be really creative in that.
Thank you for that. So open it up. Does anyone have any questions for Frank while he's here with us? This is your time. And you can just take yourself off of mute.
Hey, good afternoon. Appreciate you coming on, Frank, and explaining all of this. I guess, are there any common misconceptions that you have to debunk in meeting people on the street that are like, what are you talking about? What is this? This sounds like socialism in a really negative connotated way, right? What are some common things that you found that have just kind of firmly rooted themselves in the minds of we that have gotten accustomed to the landlord model?
Oh, well, yeah, that's literally the main thing where people, we work with Tulane and we with a service oriented class, and they volunteer with us every week. And so we have about 20 students. And so the neighborhood I live in is where most of our land trust properties are at. So we do a lot of engagement around here because, even if people aren't within our land trust properties, we want to still ensure that people have access even more so to the same information we're giving everyone else in the metro area. And this guy was jogging. He just looked like some weird hipster. And he yelled at these girls who are all 17, 18 freshmen from, wherever else in the country, they're not from here. It was just like, socialism is bad. Y'all socialists. And they were like, what? What does that mean? And what happened is this guy, he's a neighbor of mine, and he owns a lot of properties. So we encountered that, but most working class folks, they're just sort of like, yeah, this makes sense. Even if they own a home, most folks are like, yeah, we have really bad laws. But there's definitely this reactionary element that is ironic. It's not, I don't think it's rooted in Louisiana. I mean, I think overall our laws, our politicians, they've created some really bad scenarios, but a lot of the developers and people who are attracted to here, we actually have more problems with them than local people. Now, if we went out in the suburbs, like we went out in Kenner or St. Tammany, we would get yelled at, like, you know, definitely. But in this city, it's definitely, we see it's more from wealthier transplants attracted to here who give us problems because they're keenly aware of the limitations in the laws here. But average people, they get it. And they're sort of like, they're like, why can't we have stuff like they do in Georgia or like, you know, in other states in the upper South or in New York? Like, you know, people are keenly aware of how different things are here compared to other places. Locals, I should say.
Good to know. Thank you for your insight.
Yeah, thank you.
Let me ask you a question. What's on the horizon for Jane Place? What are you excited by right now?
Oh, wow. So many things. On the housing front, even though that's not my work, we're continuing to expand our land trust properties. And so I'm looking forward to that in 2023 and 2024. We are looking at creating a Renters Bill of Rights with a group that we helped co-found it, the New Orleans Renters Rights Assembly. Is something that we've been working on since 2018. But then the pandemic interrupted and we had to shift focus due to the pandemic. So I'm really excited about that. Most importantly, I'm really excited about this habitability standards ordinance, healthy homes ordinance. Our board chair, Maxwell, who some of y'all may know from Louisiana Fair Housing Action Center, he has been working on this for a decade. And so I got brought in when I started volunteering at Jane Place, and I was just a member of the organization. And so I'm really excited to see this finally get put in, because I think once we do this in Orleans Parish, I think the scales will start to shift on the state level, right? Because it's like, if New Orleans is creating stronger habitability standards, then everywhere else should get it. So I'm really happy about it, because we get a lot of phone calls from around the state, like now, and we can't help people, not just because we're not on the ground, but also because the laws are very different. And even though our laws are still in the books very similar, the political and social relationships we have with officials can make it easier to hold landlords accountable. And so that's what I hope for. Yeah, my dream, though, that I want to work on into 2024, 2025, I want to try to get $50 million housing trust in New Orleans. And my boss keeps telling me that I'm crazy as hell for thinking that, but you know, I'm not afraid of big goals. But I feel like if we get $50 million a year in this city, then it's going to do a world difference. And I think we need it for adapting for climate change. So that's my dream.
I love it. I love it. Anybody else have any questions?
Quick question. I know we don't have a whole lot of time left, but Frank, I know you all, I believe you all do ownership as well as tenant occupied property. Is that correct?
No, we do not. The Crescent City Land Trust, which will start after us, they do home ownership within their land trust properties. But we've been discussing doing it, but we're focusing on renters for the meanwhile.
Right. Yeah, I thought I saw something on your website that said ownership, but of course I'm interested in that, working with Habitat and, you know, trying to kind of juggle all the thinking about how equity can and should convey to somebody whose home has a big federal subsidy, you know, like the properties that you mentioned, and what's the fair and equitable way to handle that? I mean, there's deed restrictions as there are on rental properties that are developed with, say, LIHTC funds. But for us, the deed restrictions run out at 15 years, and then the property can easily flip if the homeowner chooses to sell it to somebody who's going to use it either for a rental, because there are no restrictions on who they sell it to at that point, or they could sell it to somebody who wouldn't income qualify. And we don't want to impede people who've already been shut out of the market historically from accumulating equity, just like everybody else who owns a home on the one hand. On the other hand, there's that conundrum of, well, how can we somehow create permanent affordability, which a lot of other affiliates in other states are striving mightily with and actually doing. And I know there's some conversations with affiliates in Louisiana and particularly in New Orleans about the land trust model, for that. So.
Yeah. So our thinking is rooted in the history and culture of Louisiana, or New Orleans in particular, in the ideal that like the housing we create, we wanted to preserve people in the neighborhood of choice that they want to live in.
Yeah.
And so our thought process, if we do home ownership, would be that why would one be selling it, right? Like your home is your home, right? Like, and so one way we do get around the equity thing is that we do this thing called renter equity, which we're trying to figure out a better term to use because we don't like it as much. But basically, it's sort of like the ideal of people upkeeping the home, going to tenant meetings. They can incur equity in terms of cashing out at the end of the year. I think the most people can get is like $2,000, but it's not quite that like standard housing piece. But that's one way we work with folks around that in this program, and we kind of build it into our formulas when we build housing. But otherwise, for us, in terms of our theory of change, we kind of don't believe in that equity concept. That said, like I said, if people are progressing their careers, or say if they have other hustles, if someone brought a house, for example, and they wanted to rent it out to make money and still live in our land trust, we would not penalize them. So songs are not like, making six figures and taking up housing someone else can live in. Because honestly, truth of the matter, with our rental market, even if you're making 60, 70 at this point, you're still, to live in a decent quality house, you're going to be spending at least 1/3 of your income on your rent. So that's kind of where we're at right now. But I know a lot of other people struggle with it, but that's my particular thought about it.
Thanks. I appreciate your sharing your particular thoughts.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, I want to make sure that everybody, we say it goes from 12 to 1, it goes from 12 to 1. So, but I did want to say, Frank, thank you so much. And I think one of the things I'm most inspired by is the language that you're using feels like you all are constantly reevaluating the work that you're doing and tweaking it and building on it, and then saying, okay, that didn't work exactly the way we thought, so we're going to try something, we're going to pivot a little bit. And I think that that's so inspiring, that it's not, we did this thing and it's perfect, and I love that. I love that thinking. And I think a lot of us could definitely embrace it. And we will be in touch, I think, moving forward. And please let us know if there are things that we can be doing from the Acadiana region to support. So just quickly, a couple of reminders.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Frank. We have an annual meeting December 1st. It's virtual. It's at noon. And it'll recap the 2022 year. And that's, again, it's the first day of December, and the first Thursday in that month. And then again, thank you always for joining us, and please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions, suggestions, you'd like to connect more or differently. Again, thank you to Frank for being our guest today. Thank you to 232 Help for grounding us with data, and for all of you all for the work that you're doing and for the updates that you provide. We really appreciate it. We want to keep connecting. So thank you again. Have a wonderful rest of the week.